An official digital currency might arrive sooner than we think. That's our main story today. Also this morning, more fallout from the Banking Royal Commission, how a shortage of diesel fuel threatens the transport industry, and why calling your boss a wanker isn't a sackable offence. It's Friday, the 10th of December 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael. I'm looking forward to that final story you were just talking about then.
Yes, it's not often you get to say that in the opening of a podcast, is it?
True.
It's a good story. You will enjoy that one. Stay listening as well for Sean's chat to James Packer biographer Damon Kitney about one of the country's richest people. But first, Sean, as I mentioned, Australia may get an officially sanctioned digital currency sooner than we expected.
Yes, the Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe yesterday said he expects to see digital money or tokens in the future whereby a digital currency makes day-to-day payments just like a banknote does today. The Reserve Bank may issue these tokens or e-AUDs, as in e-Australian dollars. That's what Dr. Lowe was calling them. While there hasn't been a case to create such a central bank digital currency so far, that could change quickly as technology evolves and preferences change, Dr. Lowe said. And the Reserve Bank was now examining the case to create a digital currency. This is the first time the Governor of the Reserve Bank has been so explicit around plans for a digital currency. And it comes as more and more people use digital wallets such as Apple Pay and Google Pay. Now, those wallets are digital forms of credit and debit cards. What Dr. Lowe is talking about is actually digital money.
And did he say anything about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin?
I knew you'd ask that one, Michael. He does remain skeptical that cryptos will become vehicles for general purposes, so you probably won't ever go out and buy a Big Mac meal with a Bitcoin, but he isn't against cryptos. He said they were good for innovation purposes and to test the market. Now, I'd call that a backhanded compliment somewhat. He thinks ultimately a secure fiat currency will settle most transactions. Dr. Lowe said anyone purchasing cryptos should take care. There's still much uncertainty about the long-term usefulness of them.
Now, he was also talking about trends in the payment systems, which might sound just a touch archaic, but it does affect us all. What other trends does he see?
Well, there were 5. The first was the declining use of banknotes and the increasing use of electronic forms of payment. In fact, the total value of ATM withdrawals over the past 6 months is about 30% lower than 3 years ago, and people are definitely switching from credit to debit cards, Dr. Lowe said. The second trend was a greater use of digital wallets, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Google Pay. This is a trend that Dr. Lowe says has a fair way to run yet. Third was a growing involvement of big tech companies in payments. He said a really important issue in that area was access arrangements. That's something the Commonwealth Bank has been very critical of Apple Pay about. Fourth is the emergence of new business models and the specialisation of payments. Think buy now, pay later. And the fifth trend he spoke about was a growing community and political interest in the sector. Michael, Dr. Lowe only speaks on issues he feels he needs to, and he does so when he feels the time is right. Digital currencies may well be much closer than we think.
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot that he covered there. There's plenty to get excited about, really, isn't there?
Yeah, and it just shows how much the central bank is thinking about digital currencies.
Yeah, really quite forward-thinking, isn't it? So how did markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down slightly, finishing at 7,385 points. The energy sub-index fell 1%, while the discretionary and technology stocks also underperformed. Utilities and healthcare companies were among the best. Now, the banks were broadly higher, with the exception of Macquarie Group. The big miners were mixed. Fortescue Metals jumped 1.5%, while BHP and Rio Tinto both fell by around 1%. The retailers were generally lower, while Toll Road Group Transurban fell nearly 2%. One stock worth a mention, Magellan Financial share price hit a 2-year low yesterday. Remember, this is the company founded by Hamish Douglass, who not long ago was really the rock star of the market. Last week, the chief executive of the business, Brett Cairns, stepped down unexpectedly. Then, earlier this week, it emerged that Mr. Douglass and his wife had split, triggering fears that he may have to sell down his holdings. Mr. Douglass said that isn't the intention, but the share price fell another 5% yesterday. It's almost halved since the beginning of July.
Right. And what happened in overseas markets?
Well, Michael, US stocks are trading mostly lower. There was some good economic news, though. New applications for US unemployment benefits last week fell to their lowest level in more than 50 years, in another sign of a pickup in the labour market in the world's biggest economy. European markets were also lower on the back of concerns about the spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. The Aussie dollar is trading at 71.5 US cents. Brent crude has fallen below 75 US dollars a barrel. And gold is worth around $1,775 US dollars an ounce.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there's plenty of stories around this morning. Nearly 3 years after the release of the final report, the fallout from the Banking Royal Commission continues.
It does. The fact that prosecutions are only happening now highlights the mess the system was in and the difficulty in unravelling it. Yesterday, ANZ agreed to pay $25 million as a penalty for failing to correctly pay customers under the terms of its break-free mortgage packages. That was on top of the $200 million it must return to customers. In ANZ's case, the problem commenced in the mid-1990s and continued beyond the conclusion of the Royal Commission in February 2019. All the big banks and Macquarie Group and AMP have been caught up in the commission. At the end of last month, if you remember, Westpac agreed to pay fines of $113 million after ASIC launched multiple legal cases against it, alleging widespread compliance failures that in some instances meant the bank was charging dead people financial advice fees. It's been a mess for a long time, but it does seem that ASIC is slowly unravelling it.
Yeah, 3 years later, and I reckon a few more years still to go. There's been an interesting story, Sean, around for the past few days about a product known as urea, which goes into diesel engines. A shortage of it could mean Australia runs out of diesel early next year.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you can imagine what that means for the trucking and transport industries, not to mention plenty of people with diesel engines in their cars. Urea is mixed with deionised water to create a product known as AdBlue. Now, AdBlue is compulsory in all newer diesel engines because it reduces emissions of nitrogen oxide. But there's a global shortage of high-grade urea, partly because of transport challenges and partly because of strong demand from the agriculture and farming sectors in Australia, which use it for fertiliser. That's triggered a run on supplies, and one producer is quoted in the media as having just 6 weeks' worth of stock left and far too many orders. The federal government is holding crisis talks with AdBlue and diesel suppliers, but players in the industry fear that diesel could actually run out some point during January.
All right. Now, what's the latest COVID news, Sean?
The national vaccination rate is now almost 89%, with the Northern Territory and Queensland pushing above 80% yesterday. Meanwhile, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews said he hoped to have as few rules as possible going forward. He said the state wasn't chasing a zero Omicron outcome. Victoria recorded 1,232 cases yesterday and 9 deaths. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet urged people in his state to get booster shots. New South Wales recorded 404 cases yesterday and 1 death. The ACT announced 4 new COVID-19 cases yesterday, and the Northern Territory government will drop border restrictions from 20 December. It means only Western Australia will be closed for Christmas.
Now, Sean, we've talked about a lot of big deals lately, and yesterday the competition regulator gave its approval to quite a few of them.
It did. The big one was the Sydney Aviation Alliance's proposed acquisition of Sydney Airport. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission said the $23.6 billion deal was unlikely to lessen competition, given the airport was a natural monopoly. Makes sense. The ACCC spoke to the airlines, retailers and service providers, and while there were some concerns, the point is that there's little competition in the market, at least until Sydney's second airport is built, so the airport already has market power and no price regulation. The regulator also gave the thumbs up to Seven West Media's proposed $131 million acquisition of regional broadcaster Prime Media. A shareholder vote will be held on 23 December on that one, and that's expected to pass. And the competition watchdog will also allow Cleanaway's proposed $500 million acquisition of parts of Suez's waste assets. Cleanaway is hoping to finalise that deal by the end of January.
Okay, now, Sean, that we've got all of that out of the way, we can get to the story that I think we really want to talk about, which is the Fair Work Commission ruling that has found that sniping at your boss and calling him a wanker under your breath in a Microsoft Teams meeting isn't serious enough to warrant immediate dismissal.
Hands up if you've actually ever called your boss a wanker. Lucky this is audio, that's what I'd say. Michael, according to the Financial Review, the Fair Work Commission held that a Darwin recruiter's gross insubordination, foul language and deliberate agitation of colleagues at a labour hire firm was unacceptable conduct. But the recruiter was awarded $6,000 as her sacking was found to be without notice. Now, the recruiter was stood down with pay and then fired after staff complained she used obscene language about the general manager and made negative comments about more junior employees. She denied she used some foul language. You can imagine the types of words I'm talking about here. But she conceded she did call the general manager a misogynist. She also called the general manager a wanker. There's quite a bit more to it, but in the end, the Commission found her conduct was divisive and not professional and affected the well-being of other staff, but it didn't meet the threshold test for serious misconduct. Pretty incredible.
Okay, Sean, what's making headlines in today's news media?
Several media outlets are reporting this morning that COVID-19 vaccinations for more than 2 million Australian children will begin within weeks after regulators gave the green light for the rollout of jabs for those aged between 5 and 11. The Australian is reporting that the Morrison government will scrap its entire fleet of 47 Taipan Army and Navy helicopters and replace them with US Black Hawks and Seahawks at a cost of $7 billion. And the same outlet is also reporting that former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian will formally announce today that she won't attempt to return to politics in any guise, opting for a private sector role.
Running through some of the other stories around today, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce has tested positive to COVID-19 in Washington, D.C. Mr. Joyce believes he picked up the virus earlier in the week in the United Kingdom, notwithstanding he tested negative twice over 2 days in that country. Mr. Joyce has played it down, saying it's nothing too dramatic.
Payroll jobs rose slightly in the first fortnight of November following the surge in late October, according to the Bureau of Statistics. The big moves came in the 3 lockdown jurisdictions, New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT. While arts and recreation employment is creeping back to pre-Delta levels, jobs in accommodation and food services still remain well below May. Across all 3 regions, the bounce back in jobs for women was higher than for men.
Now, we love talking about Domino's here, Sean, because it is truly a great Australian success story. The international expansion is Domino's has now opened its 862nd store in Japan, which is just pretty remarkable, becoming the first pizza group to operate stores in all the country's 47 prefectures. It truly is a national chain now in Japan. Domino's has added more than 300 stores in the country over the past 3 years. Amazing.
It is amazing. The National Court of Papua New Guinea has approved the acquisition of Oil Search by Santos, which means by the end of today, the deal should be done. Oil Search shareholders approved the $21 billion bid earlier this week.
And finally, Sean, Woodside Petroleum has signed a memorandum of understanding with Viva Energy to progress the latter's LNG regasification terminal in Geelong in Victoria. The overhaul of the terminal, though, is still subject to a final investment decision. Okay, what's the key overseas news this morning, Sean?
US President Joe Biden has signed an executive order instructing the federal government to shrink its carbon footprint and reach net zero emissions by 2050. That means one of the biggest purchasers in the US, probably the biggest, will have to buy electric vehicles, rent energy-efficient buildings, use clean power, all that sort of thing. It's a very, very big deal, that one. Japanese authorities have said a new study shows that the Omicron variant of COVID-19 is 4 times more transmissible in its early stage than Delta. It also escapes immunity built naturally and via vaccines. Case numbers in South Africa, where the variant was first reported 2 weeks ago, are surging and running at nearly 20,000 a day. And the United States road toll over the past couple of years during the pandemic has soared. It's quite the opposite to what was expected given the lockdowns that were instituted. Medical experts say it's likely the pandemic has made US drivers more reckless, more likely to speed, more likely to drink and drive or use drugs, and more likely to leave their seatbelts unbuckled.
That is bizarre, actually. Okay, up next, Sean, is the Daily Interview, and today you're speaking to business journalist with The Australian and James Packer biographer Damon Kitney about Mr. Packer.
Yes, Damon knows James Packer as well as anyone. He got great access while writing the book. It is a terrific conversation, not just about the business prowess of Mr. Packer, but also what he's like in his personal life.
Yeah, it is really interesting. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 10th of December 2021. Make sure you hit follow on the podcast and find us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.